Part 1. The Shadow of the Empire. The sky above New Busan turned dark at noon. Daehyun looked up from his workbench and felt his stomach twist into knots. He knew what those shadows meant. The Kryvex were coming again. Giant ships blocked out the sun as they descended toward the colony. Each vessel was the size of a mountain, covered in black metal that seemed to swallow light itself. The air filled with a low humming sound that made Daehyun's teeth hurt. Around him, other workers stopped what they were doing. Nobody spoke. They all just watched and waited. Daehyun wiped the grease from his hands and started walking home. His feet moved faster with each step until he was almost running. He needed to get to Minji. He needed to make sure his daughter was safe, even though he knew there was nothing he could really do to protect her. Not from them. The Kryvex had ruled the galaxy for 300 years. They were stronger than any other species. Their weapons could destroy entire planets. Their soldiers were nearly impossible to kill. Every species that tried to fight them had lost. Humanity had learned that lesson 70 years ago when they first traveled beyond their own solar system and met the Kryvex Empire. Now, Earth and all 12 human colonies had to give the Kryvex whatever they wanted: food, technology, raw materials, workers. The tribute ships came twice every year, and each time they took more than before. Daehyun burst through the door of his small apartment. Minji was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing pictures with colored pencils. She looked up at him with her mother's dark eyes and smiled. "Daddy, look, I drew a spaceship." Daehyun's heart ached. His wife had died 5 years ago when a Kryvex warship fired on a peaceful protest. Minji had been too young to really understand. Now she was 7 years old, bright and curious and full of dreams about exploring the stars. She had no idea how cruel the universe could be. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Daehyun said, kneeling beside her chair. He pulled her close and held her tight. "I love you so much. You know that, right?" "I know, Daddy. You tell me every day." Minji giggled and hugged him back. "Why are you squeezing so hard?" Before he could answer, sirens began wailing across the colony. A voice boomed from speakers mounted on every street corner, speaking in the harsh, clicking language of the Kryvex. Then it repeated in human languages. "All citizens will gather in the central plaza. Attendance is mandatory. Failure to comply will result in termination." Daehyun felt cold all over. They had never called everyone to the plaza before. This was something new, something bad. He took Minji's hand and they walked outside with thousands of other colonists, the streets filled with quiet, frightened people moving in the same direction. Nobody ran. Nobody cried out. They had all learned that showing fear or resistance only made things worse. The central plaza was a huge open space that could hold 50,000 people. By the time Daehyun and Minji arrived, it was already half full. Kryvex soldiers stood around the edges, tall and covered in armor that looked like insect shells. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. In the center of the plaza stood Overlord Thexvar. He was larger than the other Kryvex, with elaborate markings on his armor that showed his high rank. His face was hidden behind a helmet, but Daehyun could see his eyes glowing behind the visor like hot coals. When the plaza was full, Thexvar began to speak. His voice was translated through devices that made it sound almost human, but there was something wrong about it. Something that made Daehyun's skin crawl. "You have served the Empire well," Thexvar said. "The Kryvex are pleased with your obedience. Therefore, we have decided to grant you a great honor." Daehyun felt Minji's hand tighten in his. Around them, people shifted nervously. "From this day forward, the Empire will select children from inferior species to serve in our homes," the Overlord continued. "They will be raised among us. They will learn our ways. They will be given purpose beyond their humble origins. This is a gift we bestow upon you." The plaza erupted in gasps and cries. Parents pulled their children closer. Some people fell to their knees. Daehyun stood frozen, unable to process what he had just heard. 20 children from this colony have been chosen," Thexvar said. He gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the air above the plaza. Names and faces began scrolling past. "These fortunate few will come with us today." Daehyun watched the names appear and disappear. He prayed silently, desperately. Not Minji, please, not his little girl. She was all he had left in the world. Then he saw her face on the display. Her name glowed in letters twice as tall as the others. "No," Daehyun whispered. "No, no, no." Minji looked up at him with wide eyes. She was too young to fully understand what was happening, but she knew it was bad. She could feel her father's hand shaking. "Daddy," she said in a small voice. Kryvek soldiers began moving through the crowd, collecting the children whose names had been called. Parents screamed and begged. Some tried to run with their children, but the soldiers caught them easily. Anyone who fought back was struck down with energy weapons that left them twitching on the ground. A soldier approached Daehyun and Minji. Up close, the Kryvex was terrifying. Easily 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and a face that looked like a nightmare, it reached for Minji with one clawed hand. "No!" Daehyun shouted. He stepped between the soldier and his daughter. "Take me instead, please." "She's just a child, take me!" The soldier didn't even pause. It backhanded Daehyun across the face, sending him sprawling to the ground. Blood filled his mouth. His vision blurred. Through the haze, he saw the soldier pick up Minji. She was crying now, reaching for him. "Daddy! Daddy, help me!" Daehyun tried to stand, but 2 more soldiers held him down. He fought against them with everything he had, screaming his daughter's name. Other parents were doing the same all around him. The plaza had become a scene of pure horror. The soldiers carried the children toward a transport ship that had landed nearby. Minji looked back over the soldier's shoulder, tears streaming down her face. Daehyun met her eyes and tried to memorize every detail of her face. He tried to send her all his love and strength through that one look. Then she was gone, carried inside the ship with the other children. The transport lifted off and flew toward the massive mothership waiting in orbit. Within minutes, the Kryvex fleet began to leave. The shadows lifted from New Busan as the ships climbed back into space. Daehyun collapsed to his knees in the plaza. Around him, other parents were doing the same. Some wept openly. Others sat in stunned silence. The soldiers had released them now that the children were gone. Someone helped Daehyun to his feet. He recognized Commander Hyunwoo, an officer in the Colonial Defense Force. The commander's face was hard as stone, but his eyes burned with rage. "This isn't over," Hyunwoo said quietly. "They've made a mistake. They don't know what they've started." Daehyun barely heard him. He was staring at the sky where the Kryvex ships had disappeared. Somewhere up there, beyond the clouds and the stars, his daughter was being taken farther and farther away. In the transport ship, Minji pressed her face against a viewport. She could see New Busan getting smaller below her. The colony where she had lived her whole life was shrinking to a tiny point of light. She clutched a piece of paper in her hand. The drawing of the spaceship she had made that morning. It was all she had left of home. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly. Her father had always told her to be brave, to be strong. So that's what she would do. She would remember everything he taught her. She would remember Earth and New Busan and the apartment where they had been happy. And someday, somehow, she would find her way home. Part 2. The awakening. 6 months had passed since the Kryvex took the children. 6 months that felt like 6 lifetimes to Daehyun. He stood in a basement beneath an abandoned warehouse on the edge of New Busan. Around him were 15 other people, all members of the resistance. They called themselves the Freedom Cell, though Daehyun thought that was too grand a name for what they really were. Just desperate people trying to do something, anything, against an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. Commander Hyunwoo stood at the front of the room, pointing at diagrams displayed on a stolen Kryvex data tablet. The commander had changed in the past 6 months. He had always been serious, but now he was like steel, hard and cold and sharp. "We've made contact with resistance groups on 8 other colonies," Hyunwoo said. "They're all working on the same things we are. Modified weapons, better shields, anything that might give us an edge." Daehyun listened with half his attention. The other half was always thinking about Minji, wondering where she was. If she was hurt or scared, if she thought he had abandoned her. "Daehyun," Hyunwoo said, pulling him from his thoughts. "Show them what you've been working on." Daehyun stepped forward and placed a small device on the table. It looked like a metal tube with wires attached to it. "It's an electromagnetic pulse generator," he explained. "My sister Yuna has been studying Kryvex biology. She found something interesting. The Kryvex have implants in their brains that connect them to their technology. Without those implants, they can't operate their weapons or ships as effectively." One of the other resistance members, a woman named Jiwoo, who worked as a diplomatic assistant, leaned forward. "Can this device damage those implants?" "Maybe," Daehyun said. "I won't know until we test it." But if it works, it could even the odds a little. A little, someone muttered. Against an empire that controls half the galaxy. We have to start somewhere, Hyunwoo said firmly. Small victories lead to bigger ones. After the meeting ended, Daehyun walked home alone through the dark streets. The colony had a curfew now. Anyone caught outside after dark was arrested and questioned. But Daehyun didn't care anymore. Part of him almost wished the Kryvex would catch him, just so he could fight back, just so he could hurt them the way they had hurt him. When he reached his apartment, he found his sister Yuna waiting outside his door. She was younger than him by 5 years, brilliant in ways that made his head spin. Before the Kryvex took Minji, Yuna had been a xenobiologist studying alien species for peaceful purposes. How she used that knowledge to find ways to kill them. I found something, Yuna said as soon as they were inside. She was practically vibrating with excitement. I intercepted a transmission. It was coded, but I broke it. Daehyun, the children are sending messages. Daehyun's heart stopped. What, how? They're using the Kryvex's own communication systems against them, Yuna said, showing him her data tablet. Look, this message came from the palace of Overlord Thexvar himself. It's from Minji. Daehyun grabbed the tablet with shaking hands. The message was short, just a few lines of text hidden in what looked like routine maintenance reports, but he recognized the code. It was something he had taught Minji years ago when they played spy games together. A simple substitution cipher that a 7-year-old could remember. The message read, I'm okay. Watching and learning. Other kids here too. We're not alone. Don't give up on us. Daehyun felt tears running down his face. His daughter was alive. She was thinking clearly enough to send messages, and she hadn't given up hope. There's more, Yuna said gently. We've picked up similar messages from at least 12 other children. They're all doing the same thing. Observing the Kryvex, learning their routines, mapping the places where they're being held. They're gathering intelligence, Daehyun said slowly. They're helping us from the inside. Exactly. And they're in positions we could never reach on our own. Inside Kryvex homes, military bases, government buildings. The children are scattered all across the empire. Daehyun sat down heavily. His mind was racing. We need to let Hyunwoo know. This changes everything. Far away on the Kryvex throne world, Minji woke before dawn. She had learned to wake early, before the Overlord's household stirred. It gave her time to think without being watched. Her small room was barely large enough for the sleeping mat on the floor. No windows. No decorations. The Kryvex didn't believe in comfort for servants. But Minji didn't complain. Complaining got you punished, and punishment meant you couldn't do your job. And her job now was more important than anything. She was a spy. It had started by accident. In her first week at the palace, Minji had been told to clean a data terminal in the Overlord's office. She had seen files open on the screen showing ship movements and military orders. She had memorized what she saw, just because her father had always taught her to pay attention to details. Later, when she was alone, she had found a way to access a communication terminal. It took her 3 days to figure out the Kryvex interface, but once she did, she sent a message. She didn't know if anyone would receive it or understand it, but she had to try. To her amazement, she got a response the next day. Not from her father, but from someone in the resistance who knew to forward it to him. And just like that, Minji had a purpose. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was helping in the fight against the Kryvex. She got dressed in the plain gray uniform all servants wore and went to start her duties. The palace was enormous, with hundreds of rooms connected by corridors that seemed to go on forever. Minji had been exploring it bit by bit, memorizing the layout. She knew where the guard stations were, where the weapons were stored, where the Overlord kept his most important files. In the servants' kitchen, she found Eunha and Donghyun, 2 other human children who had been taken from different colonies. They had found each other in the first month and formed a quiet alliance. They communicated mostly through looks and small gestures, always careful not to draw attention. Eunha was 10 years old and scary smart. She had somehow gotten herself assigned to the Kryvex Military Academy, where young Kryvex officers were trained. The instructors thought she was just a cleaning servant, but she sat in on lectures and studied their tactics. Donghyun was 9 and worked in the Palace Communications Center. He had a gift for understanding technology that made even the Kryvex engineers uncomfortable. He was the one who had figured out how to send messages without being detected. New ship movements, Yuna whispered while they ate their morning rations. 3 battle fleets moving toward the human sectors. I'll send the details tonight. I found access codes to the palace security system, Dongyun added. If we ever need to move around without being tracked, I can create blind spots in the surveillance. Minji nodded. The Overlord is hosting a meeting next week. All the regional commanders will be here. I might be able to listen in if I'm careful. They finished eating quickly and went their separate ways. The servants who paid attention to the Kryvex learned to move like ghosts. Invisible until needed, forgotten as soon as they left the room. Minji spent the morning cleaning floors in the administrative wing. It was boring work, but it put her close to important conversations. The Kryvex often spoke freely in front of servants as if they were furniture. She heard 2 officers talking about unrest in the outer colonies. Species that had been conquered generations ago were causing trouble, small acts of sabotage, missed tribute payments, ships that mysteriously malfunctioned. It's the humans, one officer said. Ever since we took their children, they've become more difficult to control. Perhaps we should have just destroyed them. Too late now, the other replied. The Overlord wants to make an example of them. Show the other species what happens to those who resist. Minji kept scrubbing the floor, her face blank. But inside she felt a fierce pride. Her people were fighting back. And she was part of it. That night she sent another message home. She included everything she had heard, every detail that might help the resistance. And at the end she added, "Tell Daddy I'm being brave. Tell him I love him. Tell him we're going to win." On New Busan, Daehyun received the message and wept. But these weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of pride and determination. His daughter was still fighting. So he would fight too. He threw himself into his work with renewed energy. The pulse device was just the beginning. He started designing other weapons, better armor, faster ships. He worked 20 hours a day, sleeping only when his body forced him to. Commander Hyunwoo noticed the change in him. Noticed it in all the parents whose children had been taken. We're going to get them back, Hyunwoo told Daehyun one night. I don't know when. I don't know how, but we will bring our children home. Daehyun looked at the commander with burning eyes. I know we will, because they're not just waiting to be rescued. They're fighting alongside us. The Kryvex thought they could break us by taking our children, but they've done the opposite. They've given us a reason to never stop fighting, and they've put our bravest people right in the heart of their empire. Hyunwoo smiled grimly. Then we'd better make sure we're ready when the time comes. Those kids are counting on us. Across the galaxy in palaces and military bases and government buildings, 20 human children went about their daily tasks. Part 3. The network 1 year after the children were taken. The galaxy was changing in ways the Kryvex couldn't see. Captain Sujin guided her ship through an asteroid field, moving with practiced ease between the tumbling rocks. Her vessel, the Dancing Wind, looked like an old cargo hauler on the outside. But hidden beneath the worn hull were weapons and engines that could match anything the Kryvex had. Daehyun and his team had built them. Approaching the coordinates, her co-pilot said, I'm picking up the signal. Sujin nodded. She had been running weapons and supplies to resistance cells for 8 months now. It was dangerous work. The Kryvex controlled most of the major trade routes and their patrols were everywhere. But the resistance had learned to use hidden paths through empty space, places where the Kryvex didn't think to look. The Dancing Wind slipped into a hidden base carved into a large asteroid. Inside, dozens of other ships were docked. Some were human vessels like hers. Others belonged to different species, all united by their hatred of the Kryvex Empire. Commander Hyunwoo was waiting when she disembarked. He looked tired, but determined. Sujin knew that look. She saw it in the mirror every morning. The shipment arrived safely, she reported. 500 pulse weapons courtesy of Daehyun's engineering team, plus ammunition and medical supplies. Good, Hyunwoo said. We're going to need everything we can get. The operation is moving forward faster than expected. He led her to a command center deep in the asteroid. Inside, holographic displays showed the entire galaxy. Red markers indicated Kryvex military positions. Blue markers showed resistance cells. Green markers showed the locations of the stolen children. We've made contact with all 20 children now, Hyunwoo explained. They're feeding us intelligence from across the Empire. Fleet movements, weapon specifications, political tensions, information we could never get any other way. Sujin studied the display. These kids are in incredibly dangerous positions. What happens if the Kryvex discover what they're doing? Then they die, Hyunwoo said bluntly. But they know the risks, and they're doing it anyway. On the Kryvex throne world, Minji had indeed become more daring over the past year. She had learned the rhythms of the palace so well that she could predict where every guard would be at any given time. She knew which servants could be trusted and which ones were too scared to help. Today she was doing something particularly risky. She had volunteered to serve at a military briefing in the Overlord's war room. Only the most trusted servants were allowed in during such meetings, and Minji had worked hard to earn that trust by being perfectly obedient for months. The Kryvex officers gathered around a holographic table that showed human colony worlds. Overlord Thexvar stood at the head of the table, his armored form imposing even among his own kind. The humans continue to cause problems, one officer reported. Production in their mining colonies has dropped by 30%. Their tribute ships are arriving late, and we've detected unusual communications between their worlds. They're organizing, another officer said. Building weapons, training soldiers. They think we don't notice, but our intelligence networks see everything. Minji's heart raced. The Kryvex knew about the resistance, but how much did they know? She needed to get this information to her father and the others. Let them build their toys, Overlord Thexvar said dismissively. Human technology is primitive compared to ours. When they finally work up the courage to attack, we will crush them as we have crushed every other species foolish enough to resist. There is one concern, Overlord, a third officer said hesitantly. Some of our systems have been experiencing malfunctions. Nothing major, but the pattern is suspicious, as if someone is testing our defenses. Investigate it, Thexvar commanded. But do not overreact. The humans are clever for primitives, but they are still just primitives. They cannot possibly threaten the Empire. The meeting continued for another hour. Minji stood against the wall, her face carefully neutral, while she memorized every word. When the officers finally left, she returned to the servants' quarters and immediately contacted Dongyun. We have a problem, she told him. They know about the resistance activities, not everything, but enough to be concerned. Dongyun frowned. I'll send a warning through the network. But Minji, this means we need to be even more careful. If they start looking closely at their security, they might find our messages. I know, Minji said, but we can't stop now, we're too close. Close to what? Donghyun asked. Minji didn't have an answer. She just knew in her bones that something was building, that all the watching and learning and secret messages were leading somewhere. The resistance was planning something big. She could feel it. That night she sent her most detailed report yet. Everything the officers had said, every concern they had raised, and a warning that the Kryvex were becoming suspicious. The message traveled through hidden channels across the galaxy, bouncing from relay to relay until it reached New Busan. Daehyun received it in his workshop at 3 a.m. He read it 3 times, then immediately called an emergency meeting of the resistance leadership. By dawn, 15 people were gathered in the secret basement. Commander Hyunwoo, Captain Sujin, Ambassador Jiwoo, Dr. Taijin, Governor Minho from the Mars colony who had joined the resistance, and others. They were the core of the human rebellion against the Kryvex Empire. The Kryvex are getting suspicious, Daehyun said without preamble. He displayed Minji's message for everyone to see. We need to move our timeline forward. If they start investigating their security systems, they'll find the children's messages. And then our kids are dead. We're not ready, Governor Minho protested. We've armed maybe 10% of our population. Our ships are still outnumbered 100 to 1. We need more time. We don't have more time, Ambassador Jiwoo said. She had escaped from her diplomatic posting 6 months ago after the Kryvex tried to arrest her for speaking out at a Galactic Council meeting. Now she was wanted across the Empire. The Kryvex are planning a demonstration. They want to show the other species what happens to rebels, which means they're going to attack one of our colonies. Dr. Taijin stood up. He was a thin man with haunted eyes. He had spent 2 years in a Kryvex experimentation camp before escaping. The scars from that time covered his arms and back. "I agree we need to act soon," he said, "but we need to be smart about it. The Kryvex's strength is their technology. Their neural implants connect them to their weapons and ships. Without those connections, they're just as vulnerable as anyone else. Daehyun's pulse weapons can disrupt those implants, but only at close range. So we need to get close to them," Captain Sujin said, "which means we need a reason for them to let us approach." Commander Hyunwoo stared at the holographic display of the galaxy. His mind was working through possibilities, strategies, risks. Finally, he turned to face the others. "We give them what they want," he said slowly. "We let them think they're winning. We stage an attack that's big enough to get their attention but weak enough that they can easily defeat it. When they come to crush us, we spring the trap." "You're talking about using our people as bait," Governor Minho said. "I'm talking about using volunteers who understand the stakes," Hyunwoo corrected. "And while the Kryvex are focused on that battle, we hit them where it really hurts. We attack their throne world." The room fell silent. The throne world was the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. Hundreds of warships protected it at all times. No one had ever successfully attacked it. "That's suicide," someone whispered. "It would be," Daehyun said, his voice growing stronger. "Except we have something no one else has ever had. We have people on the inside. My daughter and 19 other children who know that palace better than most Kryvex do. They can help us get in." "You want to use the children as part of the attack?" Jiwoo asked, horrified. "I want to give them a choice," Daehyun said firmly. "They're already risking their lives every day by sending us intelligence. If we're going to strike at the heart of the Empire, we need their help. But only if they're willing." Yuna, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "I can modify the pulse weapons to have a wider range. If we can get them inside the palace and activate them all at once, it would disable every Kryvex in the building. Their weapons, their communications, everything would go dark." "Then we need to ask the children," Hyunwoo said. "We need to know if they're willing to be part of this. Because if even one of them says no, we don't do it. I won't sacrifice children against their will." That night, a message went out to all 20 children scattered across the Kryvex Empire. It was longer than usual, explaining the plan and asking for their input. It made clear that they could refuse and no one would think less of them. They were children. They had already done more than anyone could ask. The responses came back over the next week. One by one, the children sent their answers. All 20 said yes. Minji's response was the shortest. "We've been waiting for this. Tell us what to do." Yunha, from her position at the military academy, sent detailed information about Kryvex fleet deployment schedules. She suggested the best time for an attack, when most of their forces would be away from the throne world. Dongyan mapped out the entire palace security system and identified the best places to plant the pulse devices. Part 4, The Reckoning 18. Months after the children were taken, the galaxy held its breath. Daehyun stood on the bridge of Captain Sujin's ship, the dancing wind, watching the stars blur past as they traveled through hyperspace. Around them were 50 other vessels, all disguised as trade ships or cargo haulers. Hidden inside those innocent-looking hulls were weapons and soldiers ready to fight. This was it. After months of planning and preparation, Operation Prometheus was finally happening. 30 minutes to the Kryvex border, Sujin announced. Her voice was calm, but her hands gripped the controls tightly. "All ships report ready." Daehyun touched the device in his pocket. It was the master control for the pulse weapons that Minji and the other children had been secretly placing throughout the palace over the past 3 months. The children had smuggled in pieces bit by bit, hiding them in cleaning supplies and food containers. Dongyun had assembled them in hidden corners where the security cameras couldn't see. If everything went according to plan, Daehyun would activate this device at the exact right moment, and every Kryvex in the palace would be disabled. Their neural implants would overload. Their weapons would stop working. The heart of the Empire would be paralyzed. If it didn't work, his daughter and 19 other children would die for nothing. On the other side of the galaxy, Commander Hyunwoo was leading a different part of the operation. He stood on the bridge of a military transport, surrounded by 3,000 human soldiers. These were volunteers, every single one. They knew the odds. They knew many of them wouldn't come home. Message incoming from the Mars colony, his communications officer reported. Governor Minho's face appeared on the screen. The decoy fleet is in position. We'll begin our attack in 15 minutes. That should draw most of the Kryvex forces away from the throne world. Make it look real, Hyunwoo said. We need them to believe you're the main threat. Oh, it'll be real enough, Minho said grimly. Some of us might not be acting when we lose. Good luck, Commander. The screen went dark. Hyunwoo turned to his soldiers. They were young and old men and women, from every human colony. All of them had lost something to the Kryvex. Family members, homes, freedom. Now they had a chance to take it all back. You know what we're doing today, Hyunwoo said. We're attacking the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Historians will probably call us crazy, but those historians will be alive to write about us because we're going to win. Not because we're stronger than the Kryvex, but because we have something they don't understand. We fight for each other. We fight for our children, and we never ever give up. The soldiers roared their approval. The sound filled the ship, a wave of defiance and determination. At the Kryvex throne world, Minji was serving breakfast in the palace dining hall. Her hands were steady as she poured drinks and set down plates, but her mind was racing. Today was the day. She had received the coded message last night. Operation Prometheus was happening. Around her, the other human children went about their duties. Guna was in the military command center, pretending to clean computer terminals. Dongyun was in the communications room. The others were scattered throughout the palace and the city beyond, each in position for their role in the plan. Overlord Thexvar sat at the head of the table, eating while reviewing reports on a holographic display. Suddenly, an alarm began blaring throughout the palace. Overlord, an officer ran into the room. We're receiving reports of a major attack on the Meridian sector. A human fleet is striking multiple Kryvex installations. It's the largest resistance action we've ever seen. Thexvar stood immediately. How many ships? At least 200, Overlord. And they're using new weapons we haven't seen before. Our forces are requesting reinforcements. Assemble the fleet, Thexvar commanded. I want every available warship to converge on that sector. These humans think they can challenge us. We will teach them the price of rebellion. Minji kept her face carefully blank as she cleared plates. Inside, her heart was pounding. The decoy attack had worked. The Kryvex were taking the bait. Over the next hour, massive warships began leaving orbit around the throne world. The palace buzzed with activity as officers rushed to coordinate the response. By midday, 3/4 of the defensive fleet had departed, heading for the battle in the Meridian sector. That's when Sujin's fleet dropped out of hyperspace on the opposite side of the planet. Multiple contacts, a Kryvex officer shouted in the command center. Unknown ships approaching from Vector 7. They're broadcasting human identification codes. Impossible, the commanding officer said. The humans are attacking the Meridian sector. These must be cargo ships. Scan them. But before the scans could complete, the cargo ships opened fire. Missiles and energy beams lanced out, striking the surprised Kryvex defensive platforms. Explosions blossomed in the darkness of space. All ships are armed, the officer screamed. They're attacking the throne world. Send a recall order to the fleet. But the recall would take hours. The Kryvex had fallen for the trap perfectly. Sujin guided the dancing wind through the orbital defenses with skill that made Daehyun dizzy. Explosions surrounded them. Ships on both sides were dying. But the human vessels kept pushing forward, getting closer to the planet. Transports, you're clear to launch, Sujin transmitted. Good luck down there. Behind them, armored transport ships broke away from the main fleet and dove toward the planet's surface. Kryvex fighters pursued, but the human ships had a head start. Commander Hyunwoo's transport shook as it entered the atmosphere. Warning lights flashed. The pilot was pushing the engines beyond their limits. 30 seconds to landing zone, the pilot announced. Hyunwoo checked his pulse rifle one more time. All around him, soldiers did the same. They had trained for this moment, practiced until every movement was automatic. Now they would find out if it was enough. The transport slammed into the ground near the palace complex. The rear door blew open and Hyunwoo led the charge out. Immediately, Kryvex soldiers opened fire. The human soldiers scattered, using their pulse weapons to return fire. A Kryvex soldier fell, his armor sparking as his neural implants overloaded from a pulse hit. Then another. The weapons Daehyun had designed were working, but there were so many Kryvex. For everyone that fell, 2 more appeared. Push forward, Hyunwoo shouted. We have to reach the palace! Inside the palace, Minji heard the sounds of battle growing closer. The Kryvex guards were rushing to defensive positions, shouting orders. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She ran to the storage room where Donghyun had hidden the main pulse device. It was larger than the others, powerful enough to knock out every Kryvex in the palace if it worked. She grabbed it and started carrying it toward the central power core. A Kryvex guard spotted her. Servant! What are you doing? Minji didn't answer. She just ran. The guard chased her, but she knew the palace better than any Kryvex. She ducked through servant passages and maintenance corridors, staying just ahead of her pursuer. She reached the power core room and locked the door behind her. The device was heavy, but she managed to attach it to the energy conduits like Donghyun had shown her. Her hands shook as she entered the activation code. Behind her, the door exploded inward. The Kryvex guard stormed in, weapon raised. Get away from that, the guard shouted. Minji looked at him, then back at the device. 1 more number. Just 1 more digit and it would activate. She pressed the button. The device hummed to life, its frequency building. The guard fired, but Minji dove aside. The energy blast hit the wall behind her. She rolled and scrambled away as the guard advanced. Then the pulse wave erupted. It spread from the power core in an expanding sphere of electromagnetic energy. The Kryvex guard stopped mid-step, his armor sparking. He dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, clutching his head. Around the palace, the same thing was happening to every Kryvex overlord. Thexvar was in the command center when the wave hit him. He felt his neural implants burning, overloading. The connection to his armor, his weapons, his entire network of technology suddenly went dead. He fell from his command chair, helpless. Outside, Commander Hyunwoo saw the change immediately. The Kryvex soldiers stopped fighting. Some collapsed. Others stood frozen, confused and disoriented. Now, Hyunwoo shouted. Take the palace now. The human soldiers surged forward, overwhelming the disabled Kryvex defenders. They poured into the palace, securing room after room. In orbit, Yuna activated the virus Dr. Taejin had created. From the military academy's computer system, it spread like wildfire through the Kryvex defense network. Ship systems crashed. Weapons malfunctioned. Communications went dead. The few Kryvex ships that were still functional found themselves facing a coordinated human fleet that suddenly had every advantage. One by one, the defenders were destroyed or forced to surrender. Daehyun ran through the palace corridors, searching desperately. Soldiers rushed past him, but he ignored them. He had only one goal. Minji, he shouted. Minji, where are you? He found her in the power core room, sitting against the wall. She was dirty and exhausted, but alive. When she saw him, her face lit up with the biggest smile he had ever seen. Daddy. Daehyun ran to her and pulled her into his arms. He held her so tight he was afraid he might hurt her, but he couldn't let go. Part 5. The New Dawn. 3 months after the fall of the Kryvex throne world. Daehyun sat in his apartment on New Busan, watching the news with his daughter beside him. The reporter was talking about the Kryvex Empire's collapse. Without their high command and with their technology compromised, the Kryvex had retreated to their home systems. The species they had conquered for centuries were now hunting them, demanding justice. Some wanted revenge. Others just wanted to make sure the Kryvex could never threaten anyone again. It's strange, Minji said quietly. I thought I'd feel happier when it was over. Daehyun put his arm around her. She was still only 8 years old, but she had seen and done things that would haunt her forever. She had nightmares sometimes, woke up crying, thinking she was still in the palace. Some nights she couldn't sleep at all and just sat by the window watching the stars. You did something incredibly brave, Daehyun said. But that doesn't mean it was easy. It's okay to feel complicated about it. They watched the news for a while longer. The reporter talked about Ambassador Jiwoo, who was now leading something called the Free Species Council. It was a new organization meant to help all the freed species work together peacefully. No more empires. No more tyranny. Just cooperation and mutual respect. Commander Hyunwoo had been promoted to admiral. He was in charge of the Human Defense Coalition, a military force dedicated to protecting any species threatened by aggression, not just humans anymore, everyone who needed help. Captain Soo-jin was back to running cargo, But now she transported supplies to rebuilding efforts across the galaxy instead of weapons to resistance cells. She had told reporters she was glad to be done with fighting. Governor Minho was working with leaders from other human colonies to establish democratic governments. The old system where Earth tried to control all the colonies was over. Each world would govern itself now. Dr. Tajin had opened a research facility dedicated to peaceful uses of technology. He wanted to make sure the weapons and tools developed during the resistance were never needed again, but he kept detailed records just in case, and the children. The 20 children who had been taken by the Kryvex were now being called heroes across the galaxy. Minji didn't like that word. Heroes were supposed to be big and strong and fearless. She had been scared every single day in the palace. She had cried herself to sleep more times than she could count. She had just done what needed to be done because nobody else could do it. But people wanted to call her a hero anyway. They wanted her to give speeches and attend ceremonies. They wanted her to tell her story over and over again. Most days, Minji just wanted to be a normal kid. She wanted to go to school and draw pictures and play with friends. She wanted to forget about the palace and Overlord Thexavar and the awful things she had seen. "Someone's coming to visit tomorrow," Daehyun said, changing the subject. "Do you remember Yoonha and Dongyun?" Minji's face brightened a little. "Really? They're coming here?" "They are, along with some of the other kids from the palace. Your Aunt Yoona thought it might be good for all of you to spend time together." The next day, 8 of the 20 children gathered in Daehyun's apartment. They were from different colonies, different backgrounds, but they had shared an experience that no one else could understand. They had been prisoners together. They had become spies together. They had helped overthrow an empire together. At first, the gathering was awkward. The kids sat around eating snacks Yoona had prepared, not sure what to say. Then Donghyun mentioned something about a particularly mean Kryvex overseer, and suddenly everyone was talking, sharing stories, laughing at memories that should have been terrifying, but somehow became funny when shared with others who understood. "Do you remember when Minji accidentally spilled cleaning solution on that guard's boots?" Yoona said, giggling. "I thought I was dead," Minji said, "but he just made me clean them again." "You should have seen his face, though," Donghyun added. He was so angry, but he couldn't admit a little human kid had outsmarted him. They talked for hours. About the small victories they had won in the palace. About the clever ways they had communicated. About how scared they had been, but how they had helped each other stay strong. Daehyun and Yoona listened from the kitchen, not interrupting. This was important. The children needed each other in ways adults couldn't provide. As the sun set, Yoona said something that made everyone quiet. "Do you think we did the right thing?" The question hung in the air. Minji thought about it carefully before answering. "The Kryvex were hurting people," she said slowly. "They would have kept hurting people forever if someone didn't stop them. We helped stop them. So yes, I think we did the right thing. But a lot of Kryvex died," another child said softly, "even ones who maybe weren't bad." "Does that make us bad?" "We didn't start the war," Donghyun said firmly. "They did when they came to our worlds and took us away from our families. We just finished it. I think," Minji said, choosing her words carefully, "that sometimes there are no perfect choices, only hard ones. We made the hard choice to fight back, and because we did, billions of people across the galaxy are free now. That has to count for something." The other children nodded slowly. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest, and sometimes that was more important. Over the following weeks, Minji slowly started to adjust to normal life again. She went back to school, though it was strange being in class with kids who had lived normal lives while she was gone. They didn't understand what she had been through, and she didn't know how to explain it, but she had her friends from the palace. They video called each other every few days. They understood when she had bad dreams or when she needed to talk about things she couldn't tell anyone else. One evening, 5 months after coming home, Minji asked her father about Overlord Thexavar. "What happened to him?" she said. "After we captured the palace." Daehyun had been dreading this question. "He's being held for trial. The Free Species Council is putting together a court to judge all the Kryvex leaders for their crimes. Will they kill him? I don't know. That's not for me to decide, or you. There are judges who will determine his fate based on law and justice, not revenge. Do I have to see him again? Only if you want to. Some people are asking if you'll testify at the trial. Tell the court what you saw and experienced. But it's your choice. You've already done more than enough." Minji thought about it for a long time. Part of her never wanted to see Overlord Thexvar again. Just the thought of his face made her stomach hurt. But another part of her wanted him to know that she wasn't afraid anymore. That he hadn't broken her or any of the other children. "I'll do it," she said finally. "I'll testify. But only once. And then I never want to think about him again." The trial took place 6 months after the liberation. It was held on a neutral world, broadcast across the entire galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species came to watch justice being served. Minji stood in front of the court and told her story. She talked about being taken from her father, about the fear and loneliness of the first days in the palace, about slowly realizing she could help the resistance, about the other children and how they had supported each other. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just told the truth in a clear, steady voice. Overlord Thexvar sat in the defendant's chair, forced to listen. Without his armor and technology, he looked smaller than Minji remembered. Almost pathetic. When she finished testifying, the judge asked if she wanted to say anything directly to Thexvar. Minji looked at the former overlord for a long moment. Then she said simply, "You thought humans were weak because we're smaller than you, because we didn't have your technology, but you were wrong. Strength isn't about size or weapons. It's about what you're willing to fight for. And we were fighting for our families, for our freedom. What were you fighting for? Just power, just control. That's why you lost." She turned and walked out of the courtroom without waiting for a response. She didn't need to hear what Thexvar had to say. She had said her piece. Now she could move on. The trial continued for weeks. In the end, Thexvar and the other Kryvex leaders were found guilty of countless crimes. They were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison, helping to rebuild the worlds they had destroyed. No execution, just justice and the chance to make small amends for their terrible actions. 5 years later, Minji stood in a garden on Earth. She was 13 years old now, taller and older, but still carrying the same determination in her eyes. Around her were monuments covered with names, thousands and thousands of names. These were the people who had died fighting the Kryvex, human and alien alike, soldiers and civilians, adults and children. Minji found her mother's name and placed a flower at its base. She did this every year on the anniversary of the liberation. It was her way of remembering, of honoring those who didn't survive to see freedom. Her father stood beside her, older and grayer but proud. The other 19 children were there too, along with their families. They had formed a bond that would last their entire lives. Once a year they gathered here at this memorial to remember and to celebrate. "Mom would be proud of you," Daehyun said softly. "She would be proud of all of us," Minji replied. "We didn't just survive. We made sure nobody else would have to go through what we did." She looked up at the sky.